Hello and most welcome to 1075. We will continue with the death part, chapter 10, in the article Heidegger and the Thinking of Place. We were last discussing Heidegger and Davidson. It's most interesting. I think they share a lot, but there are also acute differences. One interesting way to look at the whole thing is that knowledge also take the same reductive sense of being a Cartesian open space, so to speak, a canvas where you just put knowledge, and that knowledge is not ordered. It doesn't have a before nor any after. All the parts of knowledge are equally valuable, and supposedly they can be identified because of this underlying matrix. This matrix, you can tell where the knowledge is, which subject it is, how it compares to others. But for some mad reason, the canvas itself, the underlying matrix doesn't play any role at all. Just like the observer doesn't play any role. But you can sort of easily cut yourself out of reality. You do not have to enter into reality. This makes for a shallow knowledge, an uncoordinated, mumbled, jumbled knowledge. There is no order in this knowledge. Everything can turn up wherever. It's implying that knowledge is happenstantial, random, not leading anywhere, and it's a short distance. We already introduced the polarity into the system. The polarity that tells us that we are always far from knowledge. We can own it, but we cannot be with it. And here comes the Heideggerian term nearness in. And to repeat, nearness is to put side by side to distance. Distance is what you have in the regular system. You have a distance between a chair and a table. You have distance in between cities, Stockholm, Malmö, for instance, and so forth. But nearness is completely different. That has to do with the actuality of actually being in the situation. Not something that can be taken out of the situation, where you don't have to be present. One thing that is very pertinent in this connection is the idea of introspection as something that can lead to understanding. Method used by René Descartes and others. You look into yourself to understand how the world is. This is something that Heidegger totally rejected. He had no belief in reaching the inner by going in. That could only be reached together with others. Without going into with others, there can be no understanding. There can be no development. And this is nearness. When you are together with people, whereas if you look into yourself, you have already created some sort of difference, some sort of non-locatedness. This is why I say that the space is also the knowledge space and the time space in a way. They are most similar. And I think to understand that is very helpful in the understanding of Heidegger. It's a good stepping stone. He did not like introspection. He was frankly against all of psychotherapy. Although he attended at sometimes psychotherapy, he was very against it. That sort of meditations by René Descartes or others like Kant walking around in Königsberg, finding out about the categories, it's not a valid way of finding knowledge according to Martin Heidegger. Seldom we can say such definite points about Martin Heidegger, but definitely in this case, we are born in the world, we are together with the world. This is what we is. Together with others. This is where the Dasein discovers itself in the very action of interacting, being together with others, acting with them, and then you can also be true to yourself. You are no longer a copy of yourself. Your actions be true to your honest side. And that's an oddity. Usually we think, if I go in more to myself, I'll be more true. That was not the point of Heidegger. You will lose yourself if you go into yourself. Externality and interiority are not divisions, at least not in this case, that are valid. So you see here, that matrix that we usually talk about when we say knowledge is Newtonian. That is looking into oneself, trying to find what is the world by looking into oneself. And the more I repeat it, the more ludicrous it seems. How on earth could that be a way to understanding? I simply do not get it. We are what we are together with others, with other Dasein. In interaction, we understand ourselves and others. No understanding starts with isolation. Well, I'll continue a bit here, see what more turns up. Heidegger and Davidson can both be seen then as providing an example of how the inquiry into questions of interpretation and understanding may be centered to a broader set of more fundamentally ontological issues. And notwithstanding the enormous divergence between them in style and philosophical background, there also seem to be a number of important points in relation to these issues on which the two converge. In fact, the exploration of such convergence has come to be the focus for a small but growing body of literature. As I read matters, however, the convergence at issue here cannot adequately be understood, except inasmuch as the work of both Heidegger and Davidson is read as giving a central role whether implicitly or explicitly, to the idea of locality or place, to the idea of topos, and I think that's where I ended last time. Within Within the framework of inquiry into interpretation, one might say that the idea is that the structure of interpretation is itself given in the structure of place or location. More broadly, that the very possibility of disclosedness of things and of the world is to be found through the uncovering of that same structure, through the uncovering of what Heidegger calls the place or locality of being, Ortschaft des Seins. Such a topological or topographical approach is one of the work of a mapping out of the place of disclosedness is. At the same time, the delineation of a certain topography of understanding, one in which understanding is often reconfigured. It is this approach that is so I claim characteristics of Heidegger's thinking, both early and late, although it appears in a very different form, is a central, if to some extent implicit element in Davidson's work as well. Before going any further, however, one possible source of a misunderstanding needs to be cleared away. It might be thought that whatever form of ontological topological analysis in which Davidson might be said to be involved, there is an essential difference between the Davidsonian approach and that to be found in the work of Heidegger or even Gadamer. While Heidegger's analysis, whether in being or time or in the latter work, already begins in the world, either through Dasein as always already being in the world, or through our being always already giving over to the Ereignis, so as to already given over to a meaningful context of relations. Davidson might be supposed to assume precisely the abstracted and displaced Cartesian starting point Heidegger thereby rejects, a starting point according to which the world is to be understood simply as a set of spatio-temporal extended, causally interacting physical systems, amongst which are to be included those particular physical systems that are human beings. On this reading, the topos of Heidegger's thought must be very different from the notion of mere location that might seem to play a role in Davidson. Yet to assume such a contrast would be seriously mistaken. Mistaken not only because neither Heidegger nor Davidson need be viewed as rejecting a physicalist understanding of the world, as that may be articulated in the vocabulary of the natural sciences. What they each seem to reject is rather the idea that such an account is sufficient for an understanding of the way in which human beings are in the world. But also because Davidson's own starting point is the fact of our own locatedness in a world that is already grasped as meaningful, a world in which we are already engaged with other persons and other things. Indeed, this starting point is one important feature of his approach that marks Davidson off from Quine, and is also an important element in his anomalous monism. Much as Heidegger's insistence on starting with being in the world, rather than a mode of being with respect to which the world has already been bracketed off, Husserl, is one feature that marks him off from Husserl. Moreover, as we shall see below, the structure of the Davidsonian analysis also mirrors feature of the Heideggerian, notably in taking the structure on the basis of which understanding and interpretation are possible as a single meaningful structure, a unitary place. That encompasses and defines both the interpreter as well as the wordly context of interpretation. Reprising Heidegger's topology. In the origin of the work of art, an essay that is significant in being one of the first work in which the topological character of Heidegger's thinking comes more explicitly to fore. The topological project is undertaken through an inquiry into the nature of artwork, and through an elaboration of the way in which setting up the concrete work of art is thereby also the setting forth of a world. The Greek temple, situated above rocky earth and under the expanse of the open sky, is taken as providing a paradigmatic illustration of the way in which the artwork opens up the world and discloses the various elements within that world. In later essays such as The Thing and the Building Dwelling Thinking, Heidegger presents an account of the way in which a world and its network of interconnection is brought into view through the gathering of elements of earth and sky, mortals and divinities, these four making up what Heidegger calls the fourfold, das Gefild, that is also a onefold. A round, not a work of art, but rather something more mundane, a jug of wine, a bridge. It is, according to Heidegger, only within the world, within the spaces, not the abstract spaces of Galileo, Newton or Einstein, open up by such gathering that human dwelling is possible. Whether in Heidegger's discussion of art or in his later meditations on the nature of dwelling, a number of crucial points stand out that are worth reiterating here. First, inasmuch as the structure at issue here is a structure that can be seen to underpin the possibility of understanding, it is so through the way in which it makes possible the very disclosedness of things. A disclosedness that is also the opening up of a domain in which things and persons take a stand alongside and in a relation to one another. The inquiry into understanding can only take the form of the inquiry into the domain, the topos, open up here. Second, such disclosedness requires a focus around which a multiplicity of elements is gathered. In the origin of the work of art, that focus is the artwork itself. In the thing and building dwelling thinking, it is the thing, whatever it may be. The role of the work or the thing in unifying the various elements that together make up the world does not mean, however, that the work of the things is somehow more fundamental than the elements themselves. In the thing, the jug does not come before earth or sky, but rather through their being gathered in the jug, through their being reflective in the very character of the jug, earth and sky and the jug itself are all brought into view. Third, disclosedness requires a certain boundedness, but it is a boundedness that opens up rather than closes off. Presencing, which is also a way to understand disclosedness, thus occurs within certain bounds. That is, within a locality or place that is proper to it. Such a place, as it is bounded, is also made possible within those bounds. It thereby provides a free space within things can be cited. Finally, why disclosedness occurs in relation to human being, it is not brought about by them. It is only within the place opened up by the artwork, or the thing that human being is itself brought into view. Heideggerian topology is essentially concerned with the delineation of the placed or localized structure, within which human beings are brought into an encounter with themselves and with the world, a structure that is ground for the possibility of understanding, as well as a being that within which things are brought to presence. The 4 points outlined immediately above exemplify the main elements that characterize such a topology. It aims to delineate a unitary structure that is constituted in terms of a multiplicity of irreducible elements. A structure that is bounded and yet open, a structure that stands in an important relation to human being and yet is not simply a function of it. These elements of Heideggerian topology can be seen to mirror the characteristic feature of the more mundane forms of inquiry into a particular place or localities. Typically, one comes to understand a place and so to grasp the more particular localities and places situated within, through the walking around and getting used to the various pathways and sites that make it up. A similar process underlies the more technical practice of the topographical surveyor, who, without additional aids beyond theodolite and chain, is able to build up a map of a terrain through repeated triangulation and traverse across the face of that terrain. In both cases, understanding the place is not a matter of gaining access to something that underlies it, just as one cannot derive a topographical map from a geological survey alone. Nor is it a matter of finding just one point from which everything else falls into view. The elements within the landscape provide the focus through which the unity of the landscape is grasped. The capacity to grasp the landscape depends on being able to mark out a particular region within which one works, and the unity of landscape is also grasped through one's interaction with that landscape, even though it is not just a product of such an interaction. In Heidegger's thinking, one finds exemplify the almost exact philosophical analog of such topological or topographical approach. Concerned as it is with the structure of disclosedness or unconcealment, the explicitly topological inquiry of Heidegger's later thinking is continuous with the project pursued in Heidegger's earlier work of uncovering the structure of disclosedness through the analysis of Dasein. Indeed, so far as being and time can be construed as attempting an analysis of the being of Dasein as being in the world, so it must already be seen as centrally concerned with the structure of certain locality or place. And this is reinforced by the idea of the Da, the there, that is contained within the notion of Dasein itself. Thus, in 1949, Heidegger writes of the meaning of Dasein as the term appears in Being and Time, that Dasein names that which is first of all to be experienced, and subsequently thought accordingly as a place, namely as the locality of the truth of being. It's not bad. Part of the shift from being and time to the later work is undoubtedly to be found in Heidegger's increasing focus on the Da, the there, here, rather than on Dasein as such. The latter term, while not abandoned, appears much less frequently in the later thinking. And the parallel to this is a clearer recognition on Heidegger's part of the way in which any adequate analysis of the there and here, of locality or place, cannot afford to be treated spatially as derivative of temporality in the way that being in time attempts. Yet, although Heidegger's approach in the early work does not assign a certain priority to temporality, still it's clear that the idea that underpin the topology of Heidegger's later thinking are almost present in being and time. In particular, the structure that Heidegger aims to uncover is a structure that is constituted not through reduction down to some single underlying entity or principle, but rather in terms of the structure of being in the world as a whole, in terms of a multiplicity of elements that are focused and gathered together in relation to one such element. This idea of a unity that also encompasses a multiplicity already present in, even if not adequately worked out within the structure of being time, is a central element in the development of Heideggerian topology, and in the idea of place or topos as such. And I think that short is enough, because this is a rather new turn. We get to understand what is place and locality, and it's not the Cartesian, Newtonian, or what you ever want. It is closeness to the Dasein, nearness. Compare that to distance. Distance is the Cartesian way, and that also is a view from nowhere. It is also a subjectless observer not being involved in the process. And the very idea of most philosophers and sociologists and people of spiritual denomination is to enter into the spirit by seclusion, going into themselves. Or why not that horrible term, private religious, as we have in Sweden. It is absolutely ridiculous, according to Heidegger. I would say this is one of the few times where Heidegger is really strong, that he really rejects something. And of course, we are more in the Cartesian way as starters of Heidegger, so this is very good for us, I think. It's good for me anyway. When I know what to reject, I have a starting foundation. And then later, maybe I do as Heidegger himself, see it in another light. But the rejection is coming strong on now. I realize that analytical philosophy is also some sort of private philosophy, where meaning is not in the interaction with others. And you cannot separate the meaning, the understanding of objects, our world, ourselves, from other Daseins. It's just impossible. And you lose everything if you try to do that. I say thank you very much. This was 10:75. Have a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.